Imagine discovering that a routine weekly habit in your kitchen, something you do specifically to be practical, save money, and avoid food waste, is silently creating the perfect conditions for one of the deadliest cancers known to humans, all without your knowledge. Does that sound alarmist? Unfortunately, it's not. There's a habit that hundreds of millions of people repeat every week without a second thought: reheating leftovers. Yet, the truth about what happens inside four specific foods when they're reheated is something most people will never hear in their lifetime. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal exactly which four foods pose the greatest danger when reheated, what they chemically transform into inside your body when you hit that reheat button, and why that transformation is directly linked to one of the most lethal cancers in modern medicine: pancreatic cancer. I'm Dr. Lina Laurent, and today I'm sharing something I believe everyone who cooks at home deserves to know. I've sat across from too many patients who, after receiving a devastating diagnosis, looked at me and asked, "Why did nobody warn me about this sooner?" I'm done staying silent. Here's what you need to understand before we begin. Your pancreas never warns you. It doesn't hurt when it's being damaged. It doesn't swell. It doesn't send signals as the harm quietly accumulates over years and decades of repeated chemical insults. By the time a patient experiences the first symptoms of pancreatic cancer, back pain, jaundice, unexplained weight loss, the disease has often been developing for years. The 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer? Around 12%. This isn't a disease that offers second chances once it announces itself. Prevention isn't just the best strategy, it's the only strategy that consistently works. And some of what fuels that prevention might be sitting in your refrigerator right now, waiting to be reheated for tomorrow's lunch. Before we dive into the four foods, let's break down what actually happens at the chemical level when food is reheated. Without this foundation, this might sound like fear mongering rather than the biochemistry it truly is. When certain foods are cooked for the first time, natural chemical reactions occur. Proteins interact with sugars and heat. Nitrogen containing compounds react with available amino acids. Fats begin to oxidize. In most cases, the compounds produced during initial cooking are present in amounts the body can manage, process, and eliminate. But reheating changes everything. The second time heat is applied, several things happen simultaneously. First, whatever protective antioxidant compounds were present in the original food are further degraded or destroyed. The biological buffers that would have partially neutralized harmful compounds are gone. Second, the chemical reactions that produced small amounts of carcinogenic compounds during the first cooking are accelerated again, but this time without those buffers. Third, bacterial activity during cooling and storage has already begun converting certain compounds, particularly nitrates in vegetables, into more reactive and dangerous intermediate forms. Heat then drives those intermediates forward into carcinogens. The specific class of compounds we're most concerned about from a cancer research perspective are nitroso compounds, also called nitrosamines and heterocyclic amines. Both have been classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as probable human carcinogens. Animal studies have provided strong evidence for the carcinogenicity of nitroso compounds in multiple organs, including the pancreas. Peer-reviewed research has identified dietary nitroso compounds as one of the pathways through which repeated exposure contributes to pancreatic cancer risk. This isn't speculative. It's documented in the scientific literature, and it connects directly to the foods I'm about to name. Food 1, processed meat. Specifically, reheated processed meat. This is the one most people think they understand, but don't. Hot dogs, sausages, bacon, ham, deli cuts, canned meat, any meat that has been cured, smoked, preserved, or processed using nitrates and nitrites as preservatives. These foods already contain a meaningful concentration of nitroso compounds simply from how they're manufactured. The nitrites used as preservatives react with the amines naturally present in meat protein during processing, producing nitrosamines before the food even reaches your kitchen. When you reheat these foods, you're not starting with a clean chemical slate. You're applying heat to food that already contains documented carcinogens, and heat accelerates nitrosamine formation. The higher the temperature and the longer the exposure, the more these reactions compound. Frying or microwaving processed meat at high heat produces a significantly higher concentration of nitrosamines than the original food contained. Research examining this specific mechanism, dietary nitroso compounds and pancreatic cancer risk, found that high dietary intake of these compounds is associated with elevated pancreatic cancer risk. Studies on red and processed meat consumption have proposed several mechanisms linking them to pancreatic cancer with heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and nitroso compounds produced by high temperature cooking identified as key mutagens. The practical truth? Processed meats contain their own built-in carcinogenic precursors. Cooking them once is already a chemical event. Reheating them at high temperatures is like adding accelerant to a reaction that should never have been encouraged in the first place. If you're going to eat these foods, and I'm not saying never eat them, consume them once, fresh, prepared once, and never microwave them on high. Food 2, spinach and other nitrate-rich leafy greens. This one surprises people the most. They reach for spinach precisely because it's healthy. They add it to everything because the nutritional advice they've received for decades is correct. Spinach is genuinely rich in iron, folate, vitamins, and antioxidants. Then they reheat the leftover spinach from dinner and undo a meaningful portion of that nutritional benefit while simultaneously triggering the very chemical pathway they were trying to avoid. Here's what happens. Spinach contains naturally occurring nitrates, compounds that, in fresh spinach, are entirely benign and even beneficial for blood pressure and cardiovascular function. When spinach is cooked and then allowed to cool and sit, even in the refrigerator, bacterial activity and enzymatic reactions within the cooked vegetable begin converting those nitrates into nitrites. This conversion happens continuously during storage. The longer the cooked spinach sits, the more nitrite it contains. When you reheat it, two things occur. The heat drives further nitrite formation, and the heat also drives a reaction between those nitrites and the amino acids present in the spinach, producing nitrosamines. A study published in the journal Foods specifically warned against storing boiled spinach for more than 12 hours at room temperature precisely because of this direct nitrate to nitrosamine conversion pathway. The same applies to other high nitrate vegetables: celery, beetroot, kale, and carrots. Celery, in particular, contains extremely high concentrations of nitrates. When celery is cooked into soups and stews and then reheated repeatedly, as happens constantly in home cooking, each reheating cycle drives the nitrate to nitrite to nitrosamine conversion further. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer has confirmed that nitrosamines in food are established carcinogens linked to gastrointestinal and pancreatic cancers. The irony is precise. The vegetable you're reheating specifically because it's healthy is chemically transforming into something that works against the very protection it was supposed to provide. The safest approach is straightforward. Cook spinach and leafy greens fresh in the quantity you'll eat immediately. If you have leftover cooked spinach, eat it cold in a salad the next day rather than reheating it. Cold does not drive the nitrosamine forming reaction. Heat does. If you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in this. You want to see what comes next. But most viewers enjoy this content and scroll away without subscribing, and then they miss everything that follows. If this video means something to you, if knowing about these 4 foods changes how you cook this week, tap subscribe. It takes 1 second. If not, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss a lot of important conversations ahead. Now let's continue, because the third food is the one most people already suspect is dangerous, but for the wrong reason entirely. Food 3, cooking oils. Specifically, reheating oils that have already been heated once. Most people vaguely understand that reusing oil isn't ideal. What most people don't understand is the specific chemistry of why and how that chemistry connects to cancer risk. When a cooking oil, particularly a polyunsaturated oil like sunflower, corn, soybean, or canola, is heated to cooking temperature, a process called lipid peroxidation begins. The double bonds in polyunsaturated fatty acids react with oxygen and heat to produce a cascade of oxidized compounds: aldehydes, particularly acrolein and 4-hydroxy-nonenal, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and acrylamide in the presence of starchy foods. These compounds are genotoxic, meaning they cause direct damage to DNA. When that oil is reheated, or when food fried or cooked in that oil is reheated, the oxidation process continues from where it left off. Each additional exposure to heat compounds the damage. The smoke point, the temperature at which an oil begins to visibly break down, lowers with each use, meaning the oil reaches its toxic breakdown threshold faster and at lower temperatures with each reheating cycle. The concentration of aldehydes and PAHs increases with each heating. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified several of the primary compounds produced by repeated oil heating, including acrylamide and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, as probable human carcinogens. Research examining the formation of heterocyclic amines, PAHs, and acrylamide in cooked foods has found that temperature and cooking duration are the primary determinants of how much of these compounds are produced. Every time you reheat fried foods, fries, fried chicken, anything cooked in oil, you're applying additional heat to food that was already sitting in oil that had undergone at least one prior oxidation cycle. The specific additional risk with reheating fried foods rather than simply frying at high temperatures is this. When fried food is reheated, particularly in a microwave, the surface temperature becomes uneven. Some areas of the food are scorched at very high temperatures while others barely warm. The scorched areas produce the highest concentrations of all three classes of compounds, HCAs, PAHs, and acrylamide, even if you don't notice the scorching, because it occurs at a microscopic level that doesn't always produce visible browning. The safer approach? Don't reheat fried foods. Eat fried foods once fresh, immediately after cooking. If you must reheat, use an oven at a moderate temperature that warms the food evenly rather than scorching surface areas. And never reuse frying oil. Discard it after one use. Food 4. Rice. This one is different from the others in a critical way. The risk from reheated rice isn't primarily carcinogenic in the same direct chemical sense as the previous three foods. The risk is a bacterial toxin that is heat resistant, meaning reheating doesn't destroy it, and has documented connections to intestinal inflammation, which is itself a known risk factor for gastrointestinal cancers over long-term repeated exposure. When cooked rice is left at room temperature, and research shows this happens routinely in households that cook rice in large batches, a bacterium called Bacillus cereus, whose spores survive the original boiling process and remain dormant in the cooked grain, begins to multiply. This bacterium produces two types of toxins. One causes vomiting within hours. The second causes diarrhea and is produced specifically during the storage phase rather than after reheating. The critical point most people don't know: when you reheat the rice, you kill the bacteria, but the toxins they've already produced are heat stable and heat resistant. They survive full microwave reheating. They survive stovetop reheating. The bacteria are gone, the toxins remain in the food. In the short term, those toxins cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramping, and diarrhea, unpleasant but survivable. In the long term, and this is the connection most people never hear, repeated low-level exposure to bacterial toxins from improperly stored and reheated rice contributes to chronic intestinal inflammation. Chronic inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract is one of the most extensively documented pathways to gastrointestinal cancers. Every time the intestinal lining is irritated by heat-resistant bacterial toxins, the inflammatory response leaves microscopic damage. Over years and decades of weekly exposure, that accumulated damage creates the cellular environment in which cancer can develop. This isn't hypothetical. The connection between chronic intestinal inflammation and gastrointestinal cancers is one of the most replicated findings in cancer epidemiology. The protocol for rice is specific and simple. After cooking, cool rice quickly within 1 hour and refrigerate it. Rapid cooling prevents the temperature from staying in the bacterial growth range long enough for significant toxin production. Store it refrigerated for no more than 24 hours. When reheating, reheat once only, ensuring it reaches steaming hot temperature throughout, not just warm in the center. And never reheat rice a second time. Cook rice in smaller quantities so there's less left over. If you routinely cook rice in large batches to save time, change that habit. The time saved isn't worth the cumulative risk of weekly bacterial toxin exposure across decades. Let me bring this together because I want you leaving this video with a clear, actionable picture. Not anxiety, but information. 4 foods, 4 distinct mechanisms, 1 unifying principle. Reheated processed meats produce nitrosamines, nitroso compounds that research has specifically linked to pancreatic cancer development and that the IARC classifies as probable human carcinogens. Reheated spinach and nitrate-rich leafy greens convert their naturally occurring nitrates into nitrites and then into nitrosamines through a heat-driven reaction that is completely preventable by simply eating them cold or cooking them fresh. Reheated cooking oils and fried foods produce an accumulating load of aldehydes, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and acrylamide, genotoxic compounds that damage DNA directly, with each additional heating cycle compounding the previous one. Improperly stored and reheated rice delivers heat-stable bacterial toxins that survive the microwave and accumulate as chronic intestinal inflammation over years of repeated exposure. None of this requires you to overhaul your entire diet. None of this requires you to stop enjoying food. It requires four specific habit changes. Never reheat processed meats at high temperatures. Eat cooked spinach and leafy greens cold the following day rather than reheating them. Discard used cooking oil and never reheat fried foods. Cool rice quickly. Refrigerate within 1 hour and reheat once only to steaming hot temperature. That's the practical summary. Those four changes, applied consistently to your weekly kitchen habits, meaningfully reduce your exposure to the specific class of compounds that researchers and oncologists connect to the cancers with the lowest survival rates. Now, tell me something in the comments. Which of these four foods surprised you the most? The answer I hear from people watching this almost always reveals exactly where the biggest gap in public health education lies. And that shapes every video I make after this one. Your comment matters more than you know. If this video gave you something that will genuinely change how you cook this week, share it. Not for this channel, but for the person in your life who reheats their leftover sausage every morning and has never once thought about the chemistry they're eating alongside it. That share may be the most useful thing you do for their health today. Subscribe for more honest conversations about what science actually says about the food choices that matter. Next time, we'll cover the 5 breakfast foods that are routinely marketed as healthy and that the research increasingly suggests are doing the opposite, particularly for adults over 60. One final and important note. Everything I've shared today is based on published biochemistry, food science research, and the documented work of international cancer research organizations. This is educational information, not personalized medical advice for your situation. The connection between dietary carcinogens and cancer risk is well established in the research literature, but cancer is complex and individual risk depends on many factors. I don't know about you. If you have concerns about cancer risk or your diet, please discuss them with your own physician who knows your history. I'm Dr. Lina Laurent. Protect your health with the information your kitchen never came with.